Thanks for joining us for this final edition of Inside the Zone here on the 2022 high school football season. Justin Kenny, as always, joining us. Congratulations.
Thank you.
On the newborn. Your wife actually is
yes,
the one that
she did
birth,
the
she had the hardest job.
Yes.
But talk a little bit about, obviously we had two teams go down to the state championship game. Carroll in 6A on Friday, Adams Central in 1A on Saturday. Before we dive too much into those games, I know one of the things that I've seen tweeted out is that Northeast Indiana hasn't had a team win a state championship, 0-6, since Dwenger won the 4A state title in 2018. Before we dive into the Carroll and the AC games, what's your overall take on that? Because we're getting teams down there, and we got a team down there in 6A, and it hasn't been all the same teams. You're talking Adams Central, East Noble, Lures, Carroll now. But how do you get over that hump, or is that just a case of they've been bad matchups, or it's just the numbers eventually we'll win 6 in a row, maybe?
Yeah,
like
I do think you have peaks and valleys, and you look at some of these matchups over the years, 3 straight years now with 1A teams in there with South Adams and now Adams Central back-to-back years, and we're close the last 2 years, maybe not so close this year, but had opportunities to win. Bishop Lures was there. It just feels like, is there an overarching problem? I don't really think so. It's just an interesting stat, though, that 6 straight times we've had teams go down there and fall short.
Yeah, and when you take a look at Carroll, I mean, it was a dream season. No matter what happened on Friday night, it was a season to remember, not only because of the first of the program, but because of the season being dedicated to Owen Shaley. So when you take a look back on that 6A championship game, I mean, Center Grove is a juggernaut. They've won 3 straight titles, and they've been there 4 years in a row for a reason. But for Carroll, what did you see that Friday night ball game that they can continue and use maybe for next season going forward?
Well, it was a great experience for Carroll, and that was maybe one of the storylines going into that game Friday is how big is the moment for Carroll as opposed to Center Grove being there for the the 4th straight year and playing for their 3rd straight championship. So it was just another game in a lot of ways for Center Grove and a big moment for Carroll. I thought they handled the moment all right, get out to a fast start, get downfield, score some points, but after that, Center Grove was really able to instill their will. Now, Jimmy Sullivan wasn't able to get the ball downfield like he usually is. Outside of that pass to Jaden Hill on that opening drive, really didn't get much anything downfield. And then when he was flushed out of the pocket, it seemed like Center Grove had guys ready for that at every opportunity. So it was a tough matchup for Carroll, but a successful season for me when you look at not just Carroll, but really breaking through in 6A for this area, because the better part of a decade, we've just kind of looked at 6A and say, well, eventually, our teams are going to lose early in the postseason, right? And for them to break through that glass ceiling, so to speak, and really pave the way for other programs, not just them, but Homestead and others to make runs now. Now it's just not an afterthought, 6A. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, I think that is the coolest thing is that for years we've heard, well, when our big teams get to face indie teams,
that game over, right?
That is not the case. They were on the ropes. I know Lafayette Jeff isn't an indie team, but it's a tough place to play. They were on the ropes at halftime, come back and win, and then beat #1 Hamilton Southeastern in semi-state. So we don't have to worry about that for a while now. Because, hey, man, they took care of the #1 team in the state at semi-state.
Yeah.
We don't have to hear that chirping anymore from other parts of the state. The one thing, though, I will take away from that game, though, is I don't think it was the skill position. When we think about those indie teams, we think, gosh, they got so many tall guys, big guys, skill position guys. It was more up front. As you alluded to, that defensive line for Center Grove, it looked like a Mid-American Conference defensive line. They were huge, they were fast, they were good, and they were relentless. And to me, that may be the blueprint for our 6A and our 5A teams going forward, is you look and it isn't so much receivers and running backs and cornerbacks and skill position guys. It's like it's such an old saying, but you've got to win the line of scrimmage, and that's one of the things I think that teams going forward will need to focus on when they start to play some of those good 6A powerhouses in the near future.
And that's really what propelled Carroll throughout this season, too, is that line play, offensive line and defensive line as well. And Center Grove won both of those battles decidedly on Friday. And Center Grove, like you said, it's a machine, it's an institution. I'm sure they're back in the weight room now here on Monday to prep for next year. So that's just what you ran up against, and now the bar goes a little bit higher. But we thought, okay, once the SAC starts playing those out-of-conference games in week 1 and 2, that's where we'll see 6A maybe start to make some strides. But what Carroll was able to do this year ahead of schedule, and oh, by the way, they'll kick off the season next year against Hamilton Southeastern.
I'm sure Hamilton Southeastern will be not Not looking forward to
Yes.
that. Let's talk about the 1A state matchup, because this was a game last year. It could have gone either way. 34-28, Indianapolis Lutheran wins it last year. This year, I felt going in more confident that Adams Central could win, and yet then when the game progressed, it felt like there was a bigger gap between the two programs.
It did. When you looked at Lutheran coming into this game and what they had done over the course of the season and beating teams like Triton Central and Cecina that are 2A and very good, and then comparing it to last year, and that's always dangerous comparing, final scores and who you play. But it was a more dominant Lutheran team. And when you looked at the individuals, and Montazie Clay was a great dual threat guy last year as a senior, and scored that game-winning touchdown late against Adams Central. He was gone, so you felt pretty good. Well, you have a sophomore that comes in that's been throwing for close to 4,000 yards and 51 touchdowns. And so it was like, oh crap, it was a more dominant Lutheran team that we saw. And I think maybe you could make the argument that it was a better Adams Central team last year. I think it's tough to compare the two. But in terms of experience at that senior level, I think they had it a little bit more last year. It was just a team in Adams Central that predicated on running the football. And they were able to run the football with some success against Lutheran, but couldn't stop Lutheran, whatever they did. And unfortunately, it was just too much for Adams Central. Successful season. It was the matchup we knew we would get at the start of the season. And it didn't live up to what last year was, but it was still clearly the two best teams in Class 1A.
That's what I was exactly going to say, is there's no, regardless of the score, there was no doubt in my mind after that game that these were the two best 1A teams in the entire state of Indiana. So it's a good thing they didn't meet in semi-state or elsewhere. But I thought Adams Central had a better chance based on the fact that, Indy Lutheran's in the Indy area, they're around that kind of stuff all the time. But the experience level for Adams Central, quarterback Ryan Black, Zach Worm, Keegan Bloom, even though he got dinged up in the first 1A state championship game last year. Like, those guys there was a level of calm. Like, it wasn't new for them. True. So I was surprised that it wasn't a closer game.
Yeah, maybe that was one of the things going back to Carroll, everything new for them. Now Adams Central had that experience coming into this game. I just think it was a better football team in Lutheran. They were able to come out and play well and convert. And I think Adams Central put up a great fight, but unfortunately, you eventually run up against a better team, and Center Grove and Lutheran both better teams than what our teams faced over the weekend.
How does Adams Central flip this around for next season, get back for a third time? Because I was talking with some of the guys before. We'd love to see Michael Mosier. Like, he's such a great
he's
guy.
Such a good dude,
we would really love to see Michael Mosier with what he's been able to do, because Adams Central, Indy Lutheran, you're a private school. I don't want to talk about recruiting, but you can bring in guys. Adams Central just kind of gets who's ever around him in row. So to have the type of sustained success that they've had, you have to really build a program, be invested in the community, and do it kind of the right way, because you're not just handed superstars at Adams Central. So you'd love to see Michael Mosier awarded with the state championship, I think, at some point.
And the good thing for Adams Central, they seemingly just reload each and every year, and they have a lot of experience coming back. You mentioned Keegan Bloom that'll be back, and one of the best players in the area, regardless of class, in my opinion. And Adams Central's not going anywhere. In the ACAC, they'll still be the favorite going into the season. But are they going to be as good as they have been the last couple of years? It's a tough mark to continue, and we'll see if they're able to do it.
All right, so that wraps up the state championship games, but I want to talk overall awards, if you will.
Let's give out some awards.
Handing out. Now, I put a lot of thought in this. With my brain power, that doesn't mean a whole lot sometimes. But I had trouble coming up with a player of the year. Last year, it was clearly Laban Davis, I think. And in years past, we've seen it be, runaway Jalen Smiths.
Clearly guys that
this year we had so many good teams, and some teams that maybe hadn't been good that elevated themselves this past season. I had a hard time not thinking of Jimmy Sullivan as the first guy that I picked off when I said player of the year.
I think he's definitely in the conversation, but my player of the year is Jonte Lambert for Northside. And just the way he was able to run and with the Northside team, and some people are going to look at Bronte Johnson for good reason, Bodie Dickerson too in the conversation in terms of the top players on that team. But Jonte Lambert, each and every week against whoever he played, put up huge numbers on the ground. And it's not easy to run for 2,000 yards in the SAC. It's just not. And he was able to put up big numbers against the Carrolls and the Homesteads and the DeWangers and the Lures and Snyders, and was really the guy that you looked at when it wasn't a clear-cut favorite for player of the year in the area. A guy that each and every week you looked up and said, it was another big week for Jonte Lambert. And for me, he had the most complete performance over the course of the season. You can make cases for a lot of guys, and there's no right or wrong answers, but I'm going Jonte Lambert.
I also had Kamari Juarez on my short list because he did it not only as the wide receiver, but we saw him many times, and he flipped the script against Mishawaka with that kickoff return for a touchdown right before the half. Their season might have been dead in the water. He doesn't take that one back to the house, so he's just such a versatile performer and a game breaker. But I think one of the things about picking a player of the year is we had so many good teams where it wasn't just a one-man show.
Sure.
You know, like Norwell.
Who do you pick there?
Right. Like
Snyder, too. I mean, you mentioned Juarez, but...
Northside, too. Bodie Dickerson. You're talking about Tay is obviously a Division
Columbia City,
talent.
who do you pick there?
Exactly. So Lamarion Nelson was kind of doing his own thing at Wayne and was a big factor. But, we had so many teams that were balanced and solid across the board. It wasn't a one-man show for a lot of the teams that were successful in the area. Again, if you don't pick Jimmy, who do you pick for Carroll? Because you could pick a number of guys.
Yeah, do you go Steely with that? Yeah, you could go a whole number of dudes on Carroll. So, and it's always like, how do you define player of the year? So the best player over the course of the season, most valuable is, how do you define it?
Best player on the best team?
Yeah, best player on the best. How do you define it? For me, it was Jonte Lambert.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about then Coach of the Year, because I think this is an interesting one. Because whenever you think of Coach of the Year, generally it goes to a coach of a team that you thought was going to be okay, but then exceeded expectations. So how do you see Coach of the Year playing out? Because there's a number of ways that you could go, in my opinion, in this designation.
Some guys that are in the conversation, too, with Ben Johnson when he's able to do it Northside. Brett Fox was able to do it Columbia City. But I have to go Doug Dinan with Carroll. And dealing with what that program had to deal with in June, get through the summer, refocus, use that tragedy as motivation and channel it in the right ways, and really break through as a 6A program in Northeast Indiana to get down to the state championship game. Uncharted territory, uncharted waters for this area. And the fact that Coach Dinan was able to navigate the lows and the highs of this program over the last 5 or 6 months is nothing short of incredible. For me, Coach of the Year is Doug Dinan.
Yeah, I have to agree. Doug Dinan, I split it in my mind between Brett Fox and Doug Dinan, because you take a look at Columbia City at this point last year, we're like, they're not going to be real great. Like Greg Bolt's a 4-year starter at quarterback. We don't know what Colton Piper can do. We don't, how they're going to use all these weapons. Like, they don't have, again, one guy.
Right.
They were a true team. And you just didn't know. You thought Norwell was going to dominate the Northeast State, and just thought the heart of Columbia City and the emotion from Brett Fox, and they really fed off each other, and it's just a great story. So those guys out there at Columbia City love playing for Brett Fox, and that's a lot of it. So you just saw in the post-game interviews that we had many times, just his heart pouring out. So not to take away anything from Doug Dinan, but if I could split it, that's how I would split it. I guess we can do anything.
We can do whatever we want,
pretty much we can do whatever. As far as your team of the year, who would you categorize as your team of the year?
It's tough not to go Carroll, just of everything they went through. And so I would say Carroll is the team of the year, with a lot of reasons why Doug Dinan is Coach of the Year, in my opinion, is losing Owen in June and where you went from there, and being able to put it all together and make a tremendous run. Winning the SAC undefeated fashion. Who saw that coming? And then getting all the way to the state championship in 6A. Team of the year for me is Carroll. I think we're shortchanging Adams Central. Michael Mosier not even in the conversation, Coach of the Year. Adams Central not in the conversation, Team of the Year. But that's kind of where you're at as a program when it's expected, when we're used to this. It's kind of like the Bill Belichick hardly ever getting Coach of the Year, or Michael Jordan never getting Player of the Year as much as he should. Is you kind of just take it for granted.
Yeah, and I feel the same way about Todd Mason and Eastside, because again, we were talking at this point last year about, oh my gosh, they have to replace Laban Davis and some other guys as well. It wasn't just him. And again, in a 2A school, you don't just get handed great football players all the time. So they had to replace a lot. Carson Jacobs steps in, Dax Holman steps up. A number of guys took their game to a next level, and Todd Mason got them to a pretty impressive season in his own right. Biggest surprise of the year, and this one's a little bit, the one in my mind is a little bit one that we haven't talked a lot about this whole season, but you can go either way with surprise.
Sure.
Good, bad.
Go good, bad, right?
But we'll try to go positive, I guess. Mine is positive. I would like to see what your surprise of the year is.
Surprise of the year for me is when you look at it, and probably Northside, really, for me, because we've heard It seems like every summer, the last 3, 4, 5 years, you hear about Northside, right? And all the athletes they're going to have, and they go out and win some 7-on-7 events, you know, to tune up for the season. But then once the season starts, that brutal early season stretch, they're usually out of it before we really get into the thick of the SAC season. Half the time, the kids are checking out, and halfway through the year, starts falling apart, right? Didn't happen this year for Northside. Even after losing week 1 to Snyder, didn't happen. Continue to build, and even mid-season, you're kind of, well, are they for real, really? And it was more maybe the teams they're playing aren't as good as we thought, as opposed to Northside being good. But for them to do what they did is tremendous. It's very difficult in the SAC to break through. Didn't win the SAC, I get it. Didn't even win a sectional, but they were close there at the end in doing both. And for me to see that work out with Ben Johnson and that crew over there, for me, that was kind of the surprise, because I was always kind of looking for a reason to doubt it. And until it happens, you always kind of are a little skeptical.
Right. I exactly agree. They were my number 2 surprise, because I thought there's been a lot of talk, as you said, about Northside. Oh, they're going to be good. They're going to be good. And it hadn't really played itself out in a winning record for a long time. So you take a look at them getting over the hump. And that just makes, to me, that just makes the SAC more interesting.
Absolutely.
So I love the fact that Northside got on the right side of 500 and really kind of lived up to some of those expectations. I was going to go Angola.
Yeah. Okay.
Angola finishes 4-0. They've been down for a couple of years. Now they win the NECC Big Division title. Took care of business against Fairfield, who we thought would be a contender. Took care of business against West Noble, who also had a pretty nice season. But at the beginning of the year, we looked at the NECC Big Division. We're like, I'm not 100% sure who's going to come out of this. But I'm not sure it's going to be Angola. And here they are, just winning football games, and they actually were a pretty fun team to watch. So congratulations to Andy Thomas and what they were able to do. And it's nice to be able to talk about some teams kind of finding their footing. Same thing with Heritage. They took another step under Casey Kolkman, where they had won 2 games, then 4 games, then 6 games. The future is bright there. That just makes the Friday nights more interesting for us, I believe.
It does. And we go into an off-season now in the ACAC in particular, where all of a sudden maybe we have some intrigue there with, of course, Adams Central and South Adams, Bluffton, you know, breaking through and winning a sectional championship, and they bring back plenty of guys. That defense was really, really young this year.
Yeah, they only have like 3 seniors.
Yeah, and then Heritage, like you mentioned, and all of a sudden we're looking at this league and Woodland there that is competitive that maybe we don't enter a season in 2023 where we're going, okay, we're going to circle when AC and South Adams play, and it's going to decide the conference championship. So that in itself is a little bit exciting, because the more teams that can be in it in these conferences, the more exciting it is.
That leads me to my final question. What are you most looking forward to about the 2023 season? Because obviously this specifically Carroll set the table for more success by teams, bigger schools in our area, to trailblaze that trail down to Indianapolis in the 6A state championship game.
I do feel it comes back to that drought at the state finals. For the last 6, who can break through? Who can be that team to end this little mini drought? We felt that in these seats last year, we looked at, wow, Norwell brings out a lot, and they couldn't even win the conference, let alone a sectional. Or get to the section or the state championship. So when we look at how it's going to lay out, who knows? And you never know who's going to go where and where kids end up and all that. And that's always the great unknown for better or for worse in the off season. So we'll see. At this point next year, if we're talking about a area state champion, it's been a couple of years since we've been able to do that.
I hope we are. And, of course, we appreciate all the time. Every Monday, talking Inside the Zone, high school football with us, Justin Kinney of Optimum Performance Sports. But for this 2022 high school football season, for Justin, I'm Glenn, and we'll see you next year.